Good afternoon, everyone. I think we'll go ahead and get started. People may be walking in and out today. Thank you all for coming. Don't forget to sign in. So what we'll be talking about today is ways to potentially stay safe over the holidays. Now, this is going to be focusing almost exclusively on alcohol, so not like how to protect yourself if you're being attacked in the streets and things like that. I hope that's not something that would happen, but that's not going to be part of the discussion. If you have any questions as we go along, please feel free to ask. My name is Chaz Maley. I'm a psychologist. I work in counseling services. I also coordinate our alcohol and drug education program. Just so you know, as a plug for counseling services, it's something that's free to all students while the first 4 sessions are free. And then after that, there's a small copay. We offer individual therapy, group psychotherapy, something that's known as biofeedback. We do offer some career assessments, and then I do a lot of consultations and things around alcohol and drug use. Sometimes we'll work on getting people referred if there's a need. We do offer some free online programs for dealing with academic anxiety, and then there's one on stress management, and then we'll have a few more coming out. Did anyone have any questions about just kind of counseling services in general? Okay. Chaz Maley. So what are some of the traditions around the holidays? What are some of the things that people like to do or people to enjoy doing? I know for myself, my grandmother had this small 2-bedroom house. There'd be about 50 of us that were all gathered together. She would cook the turkey and a few other things, and then everyone else would bring their side dishes. Anyone familiar with chitlins or heard of it before or eaten them before? Okay, I don't know if it's a southern thing or what. They're pig intestines. They smell absolutely awful. And usually there'd be this big pot that would be cooking like all day, and it would just make the house smell terrible. And you had to like boil them so it could get like all of the nasty stuff that would collect in the pig intestines out. Some people like to get together with family. Others, they do a lot of baking. My wife, she and her mom would get together and they'd bake like hundreds of cookies, which is amazing. Because they taste great, but then there's a lot of cookies that are just kind of floating around, and I love them. One of the things that I've noticed a little bit more recently is people sending out like family photos around the holidays. I don't know if anyone does that or gets a lot of those. It's kind of nice, but then I also feel kind of goofy, like wearing a turtleneck and like posing in some trees. Or people like to get together and go see movies. Something that's kind of interesting is how alcohol is so interwoven into our culture. One could almost do an entire presentation just about that. But alcohol has often been used like in ritual and celebration. While drugs kind of in general tend to have more of their start in sort of like ritual and celebration, and then they start taking on more recreational use. But when you think about like people having wine with dinner, especially around the holidays. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Blackout Wednesdays. Anyone heard that before? I'm not necessarily asking if you participated in it, but essentially people get together the night before Thanksgiving and they go out and they have a very good time. Ugly Christmas sweater parties. One of the things that I used to do, like I got really sophisticated when I got older, and I'd make like a big batch of mulled wine. Or you had that uncle that's got this like bottle of whiskey hidden in the trunk that he wants you to nip on. Or just even like New Year's celebrations, again, is one of the times when people are more likely to drink. So again, you see people that are getting together, having a good time, potentially. So how does alcohol impact the body? And some of you have probably taken like the Campus Clarity course, and so you've got some understanding or familiarity with it. But it impacts the central nervous system, so that's the brain and the spinal cord. Affects a lot with regards to your mood, motor coordination, impulse control, reflexes. We'll talk a little bit more about some of these things as we look at more specific areas of the brain. But think about alcohol sort of has this effect of shutting things down, sort of from the outside moving inward with regards to your brain. So what it's going to impact first is the forebrain, the prefrontal cortex. What we know about that is it's incredibly important in decision making and impulse control. So things that typically wouldn't seem like a good idea under general circumstances, like seem more appealing when one is drinking. I don't think it's oversharing to say that I've had my moments where I've made some bad decisions, but like, one time I got in a car with a stranger after a night of drinking, and long story short, ended up in a house where I'm pretty sure people were smoking meth. And so, I was like, hey, does anyone know where the bathroom is? And they're like, oh yeah, it's down the hall. And I like took off and like ran through a cornfield and like called a friend crying. I was like, I don't know where I am, come get me. Which then kind of goes into the emotional aspect of things is, there's this tendency then to start losing emotional control. You start more likely to become moody. For some people, when they drink, they get very sad. So you might have that friend that like has been drinking a lot and like suddenly they're crying and like everything that's ever happened is the worst thing that's ever happened to them. There's people that become very angry or aggressive. So this is an individual that maybe is looking to get into spats whenever they can. Interesting story. Well, interesting to me at least. I used to work in a research lab with rats that were raised to prefer alcohol. And it's actually, I mean, it's interesting, but then it's also kind of insidious the way that it's done. But essentially, you put them in this large box or this container. It's called a Skinner box for those in psychology classes. And they press a little bar, and then they get a little dipper that comes up, and it starts off as sugar water. And then slowly you start tapering out the sugar water and adding ethanol or alcohol. And then over time, there's no sugar water at all, and it's just alcohol. And the rats that tend to press more are the ones that you want for your experiments. And when a rat is done in one of these 30-minute periods, they can drink the equivalent of a fifth of alcohol, which would be about 17 drinks. And much like humans, they tend to have kind of their reactions after they've been drinking for a while. Some of them are like very friendly and they just kind of want to be held, and which you couldn't hold them for too long, which was kind of sad. But then some of them became very aggressive. There was one rat, it was about 700 grams, so it was a very large rat. And I hated whenever I had to do experiments with this rat because it was a very dangerous rat in many ways. And so when it came time, like it knew when that light went off, it knew that it was done. And so it'd go to the very back of the cage and it would wait till I had to like reach all the way in to grab it. And then it would lunge at me. I'd been bitten so many times. I actually dropped it one time and it like got loose in the lab. I like closed the door and like had this other lady like come get it. I was like, I can't deal with this rat anymore. I need your help. And then finally, the alcohol starts to impact the brainstem, and the brainstem is really important for involuntary functions. So that's like breathing and heart rate. And I don't necessarily want to get into kind of the doom and gloom aspects of things, but again, if you're consuming too much, you can start shutting these things down, which could be pretty dangerous or deadly for you. So again, I'm not going to get into the doom and gloom too much, but actually there probably will be some of the doom and gloom. So what you'll see, you'll have impaired vision. Your speech will start to slur as you have more alcohol in your system. Essentially you're taking it in through the mouth. Most of the time people are ingesting it through the mouth. What starts to happen while you're getting intoxicated is your liver can no longer process the alcohol once you're starting to drink too much quickly enough. And so then there's an overabundance in your system, and then you start to experience the intoxication or feeling drunk. Any questions about any of that so far? So what are some of the dangers of binge drinking? Well, something that no one really enjoys or experiencing hangover. There's an increased likelihood of experiencing accidents. This is particularly problematic during the holidays because the weather tends not to be very good. Sometimes we may do things that are rather embarrassing. Think about, and maybe none of you have had this experience, these conversations that you have with someone when you're intoxicated, when you're sharing things with them, when under circumstances you probably wouldn't. So then you're kind of like picking up the pieces of a conversation that maybe went by the wayside. Again, not necessarily getting into the doom and gloom, but there is an increased likelihood of pregnancy, unwanted pregnancies, STDs. So we're going to kind of look at, what are the effects of or why people get hungover. And hopefully this isn't too loud, so I apologize if it is. If it works for me.
Coke mixed with milk, Vegemite, boiled tripe, and coffee have in common? Well, in addition to being frickin' nasty, except for the coffee, they're all purported folk remedies for a hangover. Most adults who partake of alcohol have experienced at least 1 or 2 or 3 or 50 dozen hangovers in their lives, and by all accounts, it sucks. Terrible headaches, nausea, fatigue, dizziness, that feeling of your eyeballs wanting to fall out of your head. But how does the suck work? Well, it involves 3 really miserable interacting things. The first step of the hangover is the biggest cause of your misery: dehydration. Booze is a diuretic, which means it makes you have to pee, which is why there's always a line at the bathroom at a crowded bar. Alcohol suppresses the pituitary gland's release of vasopressin, the hormone that triggers the reabsorption of water back into the body. Without it, the kidneys just send the water straight to your bladder and into the john. Headaches follow when the body desperately resorts to stealing water from the brain, causing the tissues to shrink and pull away from the skull. Meanwhile, all that peeing causes you to lose a lot of sodium, potassium, and magnesium, which are all necessary for proper cell function. Step 2. Acetaldehyde overload. Our bodies metabolize alcohol in 2 phases. First, liver enzymes break down the actual alcohol in the drink, called ethanol, which creates a toxic byproduct called acetaldehyde. The acetaldehyde is then attacked by more enzymes and a peptide called glutathione, and is soon reduced to harmless acetate. This works fantastically if you're drinking small amounts, but if you're guzzling pints all night, eventually your exhausted liver can't keep up, and all that toxic acetaldehyde starts to build up, making you feel really crappy. Step 3. The congener connection. In addition to alcohol ruining your body's ability to hold water and creating toxic leftovers for your liver to handle, most drinks also contain congeners. In chemistry, this refers to any group of related chemicals. But in this case, when we're talking about alcohol, it has to do specifically with chemical impurities that form during the fermentation and aging of alcoholic drinks. They provide flavor and color, but they also contain some of the same toxins that give your liver trouble, like acetaldehyde, esters, and acetone, aka paint thinner. Darker drinks like brandy and bourbon and red wine have more congeners than clear spirits like vodka and gin. But if you're over 21 and currently hungover, you don't need me to tell you why you're experiencing such a terrible experience. You just need me to tell you how to make it stop. Fact is, none of the folk remedies I mentioned earlier are gonna help. The coffee may help relieve a headache by shrinking the blood vessels in your head, but it will also continue to dehydrate you. And don't reach for the hair of the dog, because that just prolongs the inevitable. Replenishing sugars and minerals with a sports drink or a nice salty banana isn't a bad idea, but if you ask any doctor, they'll tell you the only sure cure for a hangover is time. It's time the afflicted can spend rehydrating, eating, sleeping, and thinking about making better choices. And of course, the one foolproof way to avoid a gnarly hangover: don't drink so much. Thanks for watching this episode of SciShow. If you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, or in the comments below. And if you want to keep getting smarter with us here at SciShow, you can go to youtube.com/SciShow and subscribe.
Okay, again, not necessarily getting back to the doom and gloom, but getting back to the doom and gloom. One thing to be aware of is issues related to alcohol poisoning. And again, just some of the signs that that might be an indication. Well, one is just being aware of like how much a person, like this is recognizing it in someone else. It'd probably be really hard to recognize it in yourself if it's gotten to that point. But you've noticed a person consume large quantities of alcohol in a relatively short period of time. Their breathing has slowed. I think it's generally 8 breaths per minute. Like once it slows down to that, it's pretty dangerous. The individual might start experiencing really slurred speech, or they might be really incoherent. You're trying to talk to them, but they don't really make sense. Coordination is really off. They're very clumsy. You're constantly having to hold them up. One thing to be aware of is, when someone passes out, and you're going to see a maneuver later for how to deal with that. But one of the challenges is that sometimes people will get sick and they will choke on their vomit, which is an awful thing, but is one of the realities sometimes when dealing with the alcohol poisoning. A really good way to see if perhaps that's something that, like, you're worried about someone, you can actually take your knuckles and you just rub it on the ridges in a person's chest, like on their sternum. And if they can reach up and knock your hand away and are fairly coordinated in that regard, they might be okay. But generally you want to err on the side of caution. So if you have any suspicion, probably the best thing to do is to call 911. I know sometimes there's this concern, well, what's going to happen to me? I was drinking with them and, I'm probably still a little bit intoxicated. I'm not so sure. You can deal with those things later. I think an individual's life is probably a little bit more valuable than if they're going to be mad at you for a few weeks. One of the techniques that you can use to help someone that may potentially have alcohol poisoning to keep them again from vomiting onto themselves is something that's known as the pit maneuver, and they're going to demonstrate that for you here. And you can practice on each other if you want to on the floors a little bit later.
Hi, I'm going to show you how to perform a simple maneuver that could help save your friend's life if they're drunk and have fallen asleep. Our goal here is to make sure your friend won't choke on their vomit if they're drunk and sleeping on their back.
Step 1 is to raise the arm closest to you above your friend's head. Prepare yourself to roll the body towards you. Step 2. Gently roll the person as a unit so they are lying on their side. Remember to guard your friend's head as you roll them. Step 3. Tilt your friend's head to maintain their airway. Tuck their nearest hand under their cheek to help maintain the head tilt. Remember to continue to check on your friend often.
Knowing how to perform this simple maneuver could help save your friend's life. Learn more useful tips at www.niagararegion.ca.
Now, something about that particular maneuver is, I think sometimes it's like you want to make them comfortable, so you might put a pillow under their head. That may not be advisable just because if they pass out and they roll over onto the pillow, there's potential for suffocating. Again, that's kind of worst case scenario, but just something to keep in mind. Something I think that is important to recognize or pay attention to with regards to alcohol is just recognizing what is a standard drink. Again, you guys have probably been beaten over the head with this, with like Campus Clarity and other things that you've probably seen. I'm going to beat you over the head with it one more time. Again, 12 ounces of beer, and that's 5% alcohol is one drink. And so as you see, like various sizes that you can get, you're increasing the number of drinks that you have. Inevitably, I'll come across someone that I'm working with, and I'm asking them about, well, how much are you typically drinking? You're saying that you're having these problems. It's like, well, I only had 3 drinks that night. I'm not really sure why I got blacked out. It's like, well, can you tell me what it is that you're using? It's like, well, I've got a water bottle. I fill it up about halfway with vodka. I splash in some juice and some soda, and I'm good to go. And I have about 3 of those, and I'm good. It's like, well, in that container, you could be having, anywhere from 3 to 4 drinks. And so having 3 of those, you could have anywhere between 9 and 12. And so you're actually drinking a lot more than you spend. And then just because of the way the alcohol impacts the body, if you're like downing one of those very quickly, you're not really going to start feeling the effects very immediately. And so then again, it gets a lot easier then to drink more. Just with the red Solo cups, there's actually lines on them, and you probably recognize those. And those actually kind of tell you what the number of drinks are based on the substance that you're using. So actually the very bottom line is actually what would be for 80 proof and 40% alcohol, the hard liquor, that very bottom line. It doesn't seem like a lot. It's like that's just a swallow. But, well, essentially that is one drink. And then you see the various lines, 4 ounces for wine, 7 ounces for like a malt liquor, so like Cobra, and then 12 ounces for your standard 5% alcohol beer. So something important to keep in mind is blood alcohol concentration. So how much alcohol do you actually have in your system at a given point in time? It varies from person to person. Usually it's based on weight. There are some gender differences. It will depend on how much water you naturally have in your body. But you can see for, say, like a 200-pound man that has had 3 drinks in an hour, their BAC would be at about a 0.06. And so they would technically be impaired. At the 0.02 level, it's more of that possibility that they're impaired, but definitely by 0.06, one is impaired. Anything over that is considered, or 0.08 or higher is considered legally intoxicated. If you are under the age of 21 and you're pulled over by the police and you have any alcohol in your system, that could be considered a violation, and they could give you a DUI for that. So that's something to be mindful of, and we'll see a little bit later like how DUI arrests tend to go up around the holidays. So what are you experiencing at some of these different BAC levels? Well, not necessarily saying that I'm like advocating like drinking, but if you are and you like have the wherewithal to like try and calculate it, you want to be sort of in the 0.02 to 0.05, 0.07 range. That's when you're feeling buzzed, you're feeling relaxed, you might experience some euphoria. It will start to lower inhibitions a little bit, so it might get a little bit easier to talk to people, although I think learning how to talk to people would be a good skill to develop. You might experience some exaggerated emotions, so you might be a little happier than you are than usual. Once you get into the 0.08 range, again, you're legally impaired. You'll experience the euphoria, but then you could get tired really easily. Once you start getting higher still, you're more likely to experience the dysphoria or the sadness or the anxiety or the frustration or the anger. Once you start getting into the higher ranges, so 0.31 and above, that's when you're more likely to see someone that's experiencing alcohol poisoning. Some individuals have an onset of coma. I actually have encountered someone who's like BAC was like a 0.65, and we were able to have a conversation. It was when I worked in an inpatient unit, and I'm not really sure like how they were surviving, but he had trained like very long and for many years to get to that point. So what are some of the dangers of mixing alcohol in the holidays? Well, you can see from this infographic here that the number of, again, this is kind of the doom and gloom again, but the number of deaths, highway deaths related to alcohol tend to increase more around the holidays. The highest percentage is around New Year's, again, because a lot of people are on the roads, a lot of people are traveling. The number of DUI arrests go up quite a bit because then they start doing more of the traffic stops. They start having the checkpoints. Who was the quarterback that recently got nailed at a checkpoint? Was it JT Barrett at Ohio State? Well, he actually didn't. He tried to flee the checkpoint, and they have like people kind of like hanging out because they know people are going to flee the checkpoint, and he got pulled over for a DWI. So just being mindful of that when you are and about, if again you are choosing to drink. So how do you take care of yourself? How do you stay safe if that's something that you're choosing to do? Like there are a lot of people that choose not to drink, and that's great and that's fine, but you definitely want to have a plan. One of the things I sometimes talk to people who maybe have more problems with alcohol is like, okay, you know, if you're generally drinking between 12 to 15 each time that you go out, can we try, and again, this is tapering down quite a bit, but can we move that number to 7 or 8? And if they have this plan where I'm going to stay at 7 or 8, and they do it very consistently for a long period of time, I might say, okay, that's still problematic drinking, but maybe you can get it under control. But again, having an idea about, all right, I know that I'm going to be at this event for several hours. You know, my goal is to have anywhere from 4 to 5 in that time. Always figure out a way that how you're going to get home and where you're going to stay, and make sure it's someone that you trust, somewhere that you believe is safe. You know, I know sometimes there's this concern. It's like, well, I don't necessarily want to like leave my car somewhere, or you know, I don't want to deal with like paying for a taxi or waiting for a taxi. But you know, again, if you start equating that into real dollars, you know, you could be paying up to $2,000 to deal with a DUI if you get arrested. And so like a $20 cab, I think, is more appealing. You know, avoiding the hard alcohol if you can, which you can because you have a choice. You know, if you're going to drink something, kind of like stick to the same thing throughout the same night, and again, limit the amount that you're having. Try and space out some of your drinks over time, so don't like, you know, have, you know, 3 shots in like 30 minutes and then wait an hour and then start having another drink, because again, your body is still processing the alcohol that you've consumed before. And then if you're on certain medications, you definitely don't want to be drinking. So if you're on muscle relaxers, you're taking certain antidepressants, anti-anxiety medications, any sort of opiate, you really want to avoid alcohol because the effect could be potentially dangerous. And then don't accept drinks from strangers, which seems kind of standard, but you never know. So, welcome. So, you know, what are some things that you can do alternatively? Well, I know that, you know, some of this seems kind of, you know, it may seem silly, but, you know, have like a game night that you can do with your friends. You know, make the holidays a time that you're going to stay really active. You know, I know for myself, I tend to go and I tend to overindulge a little bit with regards to like, you know, turkey and stuffing or whatever. Have a snowball fight if there's snow on the ground. This could be a good time to start picking up a hobby if you're at home for the winter break. You know, maybe there's something that you've really been wanting to do. Planning for the upcoming semester, so kind of what you want things to look like for yourself with regards to grades, things like that. Well, that's the end, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. Are there any questions? Yeah, I know. Welcome to the tail end.